From B Media Production, this is B Podcasting. Engage your audience with podcasts.
Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of season 2 of B Podcasting, where this season we're studying case studies of successful branded podcasts. I'm Nick Schildberger. Today, we hear from a veteran broadcaster bringing his experience into the world of in-house podcasting. But before that, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and podcast aficionado, Chris Ashmore.
G'day, Nick.
Now, I believe some new stats on the world of podcasting have been released and you're all over them.
Well, I'm all over a lot of things, but that's right, Nick. Edison Research and Triton Digital released their 2018 Infinite Dial survey, which was a bit earlier in March. And as always, it gives the latest synopsis of the listening habits of Americans, particular focus on podcasts. So there's a few things to go through, but I won't go through them all because that's a lot to go through. 2,000 people, 2,000 Americans were surveyed. And look, there's been a steady increase, as we know, in podcast listening. It continues to increase. It's never been exponential, but it's the awareness is growing. So do you want to hear some of the stats?
I do.
All right. Well, one thing, 44% of Americans have ever listened to a podcast, which is, interestingly, a 50% increase of podcast listenership in 4 years. I mean, that's incredible for a particular medium. Those who listen to podcasts on a weekly basis average 7 podcasts each week. Is that what you listen to?
Well, I saw that. I think it was for 5.6 last year. So it seems that those that are listening to podcasts are listening to slightly more podcasts each week. 7's probably about the max I can get into a week, though.
Has your listening gone up, do you think? The number of podcasts?
In the last 12 months, it probably has, yes.
I think for me, the quality of podcasts has increased. So I'm listening to new ones and different ones, the ABC, particularly Australian podcasts. So
yeah, I definitely agree with that. Quality's increased, which means some of the ones that I was listening to previously, I'm not listening to because I found better ones.
Going on to smart speakers, 18% of Americans own a smart speaker. That's up from 7% in 12 months. That's almost a 300% increase in a year. That's incredible. The places in which podcast listening is done most often are the home, almost 50%. 22%, the next category, is in a car or a truck, which interestingly has increased from 18% the previous year, which suggests that it's getting easier to listen to streamed or downloadable audio content in the car. Other stats, Nick, only 19% of listeners ever increase the speed of their podcasts to listen to them faster. Are you one of them?
Well, we discussed this before. I was surprised that it was as high as 19%. That means 1 in 5 people are speeding up their podcasts.
Who have ever sped up their podcasts.
And that's the critical word, yeah, ever, because I used to speed up podcasts. I don't as much anymore. And I think it comes back to what we were saying before about quality. I used to speed up podcasts that I sort of wanted to get through them because they were maybe semi-interesting. Mm-hmm. Now that the quality is increased, I'm enjoying podcasts even more, so I'm probably listening to them at normal speed.
Sam Harris, a famous philosopher and contemporary thought leader, I suppose, in America, he has a very popular podcast, often, in the top 20 in America. I listen to that, or at least I used to. It's very interesting subjects, but my God, he talks slowly. That's the only one that I've increased the speed on, and he could produce it a lot better, or somebody should produce it for him a lot better, because a lot of editing needs to be involved. That would be the only one for me. If you have to speed it up, it's probably not a good podcast, I think.
I agree.
29% of households have no radio device.
I was very surprised by that.
I was surprised by how high the number is. I don't have one. Well, actually I do, but it's in the bottom drawer somewhere. I never use it. I use my iPhone and my Google Home for that these days. But interestingly, today, 50% of 18 to 34-year-olds have no radio. 10 years ago, that was 6%. Last stat before we get into our interview, Nick, audiobook listening. Now, this is interesting. It has plateaued. It plateaued last year. The percentage of Americans who have ever listened to an audiobook is 44%. Last year it was 45%. Year before that, 43%. Year before that, 43%. We're not seeing an increase, or I think it's levelled out, perhaps even dropped, because compared to podcasting, audiobook listening is pretty bland. You're listening to somebody read a book to you. Can't be that exciting.
There's probably two things at play there, though. One, audiobook listening in the US has been huge for decades. So that number, if you went back 10, 20 years, it was probably around that same number. Whereas in Australia, audiobook listening never really took off anywhere near like it did in the US. And secondly, the audiobook producers, namely the biggest one being Amazon through Audible, are starting to create podcasts. So they're cannibalising their own audience as well.
Yeah, whether it's cannibalising or adding to the suite of products, I think maybe it's a reflection of those who read books. They also enjoy audiobooks as well, and 55% of the population don't read.
Well, here's some homework for the next episode. Can you tell me what the stats are on people reading books?
If I remember, I'll do that, yeah.
Well, that's probably enough stats for today. Chris, you had done a blog on our website at be.com.au with more information from that research. If you go to our website and click on podcast strategy and advice, you'll see all of our blogs.
Indeed. And look, in a few weeks or a couple of months, there will be a survey on Australian listening stats, so stay tuned for that as well.
And that'll be interesting to see whether we're catching up as much as we have over the last couple of years. But it's time to move to our feature interview, our case study for this episode. Who did you speak to, Chris?
Phil Sylvester, Head of PR and Communications at global travel insurance and lifestyle brand World Nomads. Phil's background is in broadcast media, 30 years in fact, including as a TV producer at Channel 7 and as a journalist and broadcaster at Macquarie Network's 2GB. He's carried across the same radio techniques to the World Nomads podcast that he co-hosts with former radio breakfast announcer and broadcast journalist Kim Napier. So do yourself a favour, have a listen to one of the podcast episodes to understand how brilliantly they've put all this together. Details are in the show notes. But first, I ask Phil, what is World Nomads exactly?
We're a global company. We sell policies to people in 130 different countries around the world. We like to say we now provide insurance for people who are independent, adventure-minded travellers. So we're not packing people onto tour buses. We're looking at people who want to go off and seek their own adventure independently outside of organised tours. So we've got a heavy emphasis on what adventure means, and that's not just, bungee jumping off things, but this is like getting close to local communities and going off the beaten path and finding ways to learn new skills or seek out experiences outside of your normal day.
And it's a demographic that you find listens to podcasts.
Yes, they're very tech savvy and they have found ways of staying connected whilst they're travelling, and podcasting is a big thing with that audience. I mean, the same sort of audience which is shunning the usual sort of linear programmed television and radio. They like to have things when they want them.
Now, it's taken a while for podcasting to catch on for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's been around for a decade or more, but it's only recently that it's really started to have traction at a larger scale. What is it about podcasting that makes it become so popular these days?
Can I say our largest market, by the way, we sell 34% of our policies to the United States. And as you know, the take-up of podcasting in the US is just phenomenal. They love it over there. So it made sense for us to get involved in it there. It's a bit slower in places like Australia and especially the UK. I think they're pretty happy with their BBC services over there. But why did we decide to get into it? Well, we don't just sell travel insurance. We don't call ourselves generally a travel insurance company. We're actually a travel lifestyle brand. So we talk about all those aspects of travel, about what it means to be a nomad, to be a world nomad. And we've got, in addition to the travel safety blog that I helped create, we have, other verticals as well where we talk about getting inspiration to travel, about how you can travel responsibly and how you can get tips and tricks for travelling as making yourself a better traveller. So it ends up being an entire content marketing umbrella around. Most people talk about funnels. We've got an onion where you work down through the layers of what we do until you get to the core of our business, which is selling the travel insurance. But throughout each of those layers, we have done, video, and we've done photography, and we've obviously done written content. And it was time when we saw the take-up of podcasting, especially in the United States, to go, well, we've got the skills in the house, so we better jump on.
And you're finding that the podcast is aligning with your marketing strategy and getting people to listen?
Yeah, look, we're very lucky here with the executive management of not only the brand but the group that overlooks several travel insurance brands that we have, that they are very open to understanding that you can't really put a measure on the success of content. What is the ROI of content? As I said to one of the bosses some time ago, well, you could try switching it off for 6 months and see how you go, which he wasn't prepared to do. So he knew content worked, but, measuring the ROI of it is very difficult. But we're kind of lucky that they understand that this type of content and podcasting is, you're never going to be able to go, well, that episode of the podcast sold 20 insurance policies. That's never going to happen. So we're up at the top of the funnel. We're in the awareness part of the funnel, about making the mouth of the funnel wider at the top. So, and then connecting it to all the other parts that we do, and, trying to convert people and shove them further down the funnel.
And tell us a bit about the podcast, Phil. World Nomads, it's hosted by yourself and former radio breakfast announcer Kim Napier. Is that right?
That's right. Kim, she is a godsend. She's fantastic talent. The format of it, we decided, a lot of people in the business love podcasting, and Richard Feidler's Conversations is a big hit with lots of people. And I, said to them, yeah, that's all well and good. And I know the type of, 45 minutes to an hour long, as I call it, between two ferns conversation is very popular, and people do like that, and there is a place for that. But we have at World Nomads such a broad scope of content. We have such a, broad brush with which to draw, that I said what we should try and do is do as many little touch points as we can in the amount of time that it takes for somebody to do a reasonable commute. So I go for definitely under 45 minutes, less than 40 if we can. The other thing is, if you get a 45-minute podcast with one guest and one topic, if you don't like that guest and you don't like that topic, then you're not going to be engaged with it. And with my broadcast radio background, as you know, in commercial radio, no interview ever goes more than 7 minutes. And I said, well, we can stretch it a bit more than that, at 10 minutes, 12 minutes, whatever, is our main interview. But somebody listening to our podcast, if they don't like what they're listening to, they've only got to hang on a couple of minutes, and we're going to change topic, and we're going to have something new, and we're going to try and keep them engaged with it. So what we have ended up with is a kind of a magazine style, for want of a better description, or as another way I describe it, I take the 3-hour-long afternoon talkback radio show I used to produce and do it in 45 minutes.
Well, it does come across as quite pacey, and you're right, there's enough stuff in there to keep anyone interested, different topics around the world.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Because I worry that we tried to stuff too much in. Do you think so? Do you think it's a bit too pacey?
I think it's got the right balance. From our point of view, our interviews are normally not that long, and for our Business Essentials program, we like to keep a collection of different topics. Mind you, ours is more business. It's a bit more dry than your average radio
travel
show.
That's right.
That's right. But for me, it gave enough information without going on too long. So I thought the balance was right. It is a lot pacier than a lot of other podcasts, but then again, you have the talent and the experience behind you. And this leads to my question, how long does it take for you to put a podcast episode together?
Well, we're fortnightly, so we kind of have a non-publish week where we put things together. Kim, she's not full-time. She's working about 2/3 of a week, with my support there as well. But we don't do it as live, not yet anyway. Well, I want to do that at some stage, compile it as live show so that we can do video and record that as well. But at the moment we compile it, so we can pre-record interviews weeks in advance if somebody's available, and we work to the editorial calendar that we have for the rest of the site, so which is kind of based on the destinations that we're going to feature each month. The brand features a couple of destinations per month, and that's planned, a year out. So we know what's going to be coming up, kind of know what are the World Nomadsy type angles on each destination that we want to talk about. So we can go and source talent for that, or if we see somebody, we go, they'd be great talent for when we want to talk about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro or something. We can pre-record that and just put it away in the bank, and we'll edit it up and compile it later. So, yeah, there's no time frame for compiling an episode because we don't do it as live.
And have you built your own studio and in the office? And what equipment do you use?
Yeah, that was one of the stipulations when I put the strategy to the executive. I said, we can get an iPhone and a cheap mic and we can sit around that. And yes, it is all about the quality of the content. But the things that I call 1%ers, like the amount of effort it takes to do 99% of a job, the same amount of effort is needed for the final 1%. The old 80-20 rule, that sort of thing. And I said, so I want this to sound like in American terms, an NPR broadcast. I want it to sound like an ABC broadcast. So I want proper equipment in there. I want good quality microphones.
Now, I was going to ask you, with all your experience in broadcasting, particularly radio, do you have a point of view about the differences between podcasting and radio? Is there a difference?
What I think is different about podcasting is the ability to go deeper. And again, Richard Fidler's conversation, I mean, how magnificent is that, where you can really go off deep down those rabbit holes and it doesn't really matter where it takes you, you can go, which is the beauty of this. Like we can just go off on a tangent with people, and because as long as we're, within the parameters of our being, our audience will come with us. So, yeah, I borrowed from radio, but I love the fact that you can get deeper.
Well, for other communications directors or company owners that are listening to this, Phil, what would you advise to them who might be thinking about getting involved with podcasting?
It's obviously a major part of a content marketing strategy that every business should have. And we also create quite a lot of video, and anybody who's done that will know how time intensive that is. The lead time for creating video content and the cost of creating video content is a huge barrier that you just don't get out of podcasting. It's just so much more simple to do.
What do you think makes a good podcast?
When I was putting it together, my general manager, we were talking about different formats that we can do. And he said, mate, my one thing is you've just got to make it interesting. Yeah, duh. No, it's just got to be interesting. Like, would you listen to it? It's got to have humour in there as well, which is appropriate for our topic. But it's got to be interesting. It's got to be engaging, and which is why it's part of content marketing, because, what are the questions your prospective customers are asking? Start answering those, and they will find that interesting.
Well, good answer. I can't argue with that. Phil Sylvester, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Chris.
That's Phil Sylvester.
So Phil said a good podcast has to be interesting and have a little bit of humour. Does that leave us in the not good podcast territory?
Possibly. Maybe we can improve on it, tell a few jokes. But he's right. You got to. Yeah, he's bouncing off the radio format, lively breakfast radio, particularly for that audience. World travellers. You're going overseas for some fun, excitement. A bit of humour is needed, I think.
And what he's also taken from his media background is that emphasis on quality, and he talks about getting the 1%ers right. He had the goal of sounding like NPR or the ABC here in Australia, which I think is an excellent place for any business or brand who's looking at podcasting to set the bar high with your quality. They've chosen to do it themselves in-house, obviously with his skills. That was the right way to go. But again, he's convinced the business to buy good microphones. They've sound-treated a room. Mm-hmm. You can't always do that. That's
right. And he's brought across his skills, his experience, the techniques of broadcast journalism into the podcast. And it totally shows. If you haven't done it before, get the experience somehow. Bring someone in who has done it. Hire someone into the company that does broadcast journalism. There are plenty of communications departments with people from, say, print, but not necessarily knowing how to talk in front of a microphone or in front of a camera. So well done to him.
Do you think our listeners would be surprised that when you asked how long it takes to do their fortnightly episode, that he didn't say the exact number of hours, but he has a woman working on the podcast, and he said, about 2/3 of her week is compiling an episode. So that's a lot of time to produce an episode of a podcast.
Well, it is, and it's not just press record and there you've got your podcast and press stop and put it together. It's all the research that goes into it. It's teeing up these key interviews in advance. He says he has a library of different interviews on the shelf that they use when they have to. I mean, if you listen to his podcast, there's several topics all jam-packed in the one show. So, of course, it's going to take a fair bit of time to put together. So,
on the flip side, he said it's quicker than producing video, and he talked about, as many of our podcast case studies do, about it fitting into the overall content marketing strategy. And he talks about doing video, photography, written content, and how this fits into that, and how it's a part of the awareness. I think he referred to it's the awareness part of the funnel. Mm-hmm. And what are they, 24 weeks in, and clearly as far as awareness goes, they're happy with the results they're seeing.
That's right. And the emphasis, and we talk about this time and time again, Nick, it's a long-term strategy. You're not going to get somebody to buy from you from the first episode or even a couple of episodes, especially if it's something like insurance. I mean, you're not going to get that until you head overseas, you're buying your tickets, you're planning your trip. So when you are ready for insurance, who are you going to check out? You're going to check out those people that you're comfortable with, that you trust, and you get that from a podcast. So he just emphasises what we've been saying this whole series on Be Podcasting. Now, I'm going to introduce a new segment, and it's called What Have You Got segment. So what it is, we bring something to the table here in the studio booth worth talking about, some new invention, some new app, some new innovative tool for podcasters. So I'll start it off this episode, and perhaps we can both have one for next episode, Nick. But mine is a tool. It's a great search engine just for podcasts. Now, we interview several people every week for our various audio programs, don't we, Nick?
We do.
And it's handy to know how well or how poorly they perform behind a microphone before we contact them to interview them. Now, the search engine is called Listen Notes. When you go there, type in somebody's name and it will provide you the podcast episodes that he or she has been on, provided that their name has been written into the show notes. It's not just names, though. Like any search engine, if you just type in a particular subject that you want to hear a podcast episode on, it'll bring that podcast episode up, including a little player, so you can play it straight into that web page, or you get directed to download it or go to their website. It's great.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I had not heard of that.
It's called listennotes.com. Information's on the show notes.
I'll make sure I have something for your new segment next episode. Well, that's it for another episode of Be Podcasting. For more about us and how we can help you use audio content to build engagement, go to be.com.au. From all of us at Be Media Production, thanks so much for listening.
Be Podcasting is produced by the team at Be Media Production. Managing Director Nick Schildberger, Executive Producer Heather Dawson, Producer Chris Ashmore, and I'm Peter Letts, Director of Audio. For more about us, go to be.com.au.